The envelope was not even meant for her. Adaeze found out at 8:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before she was supposed to be on her lunch break, when her supervisor Blessing dropped a sealed brown envelope on her desk and said, "Ryder called in sick, you're going," and walked away before Adaeze could open her mouth. She stared at the envelope. The envelope stared back. It had the ministry's official stamp on the front, the kind with the gold embossing that nobody ever actually looked at, but that made everything feel heavy and important. And below the stamp, written in careful block letters, was a name she had seen only on public boards and civil service notices, and once on the side of a building that was being renamed after someone still alive, which she had always thought was a strange thing to do to a building. Chief Emeka Okafor, Obi Council, Provincial Hall. She picked the envelope up, set it down, picked it up again. Blessing, she called across the office. Blessing was already on the phone. Blessing. Nothing. Adaeze looked at the envelope one more time, then tucked it under her arm, picked up her bag, and went. She had lived in the city for 6 years by then. Long enough to know the roads, long enough to stop calling home every Sunday, long enough to stop flinching when conductors shouted at her on the bus. She had grown up in a village called Umueze, which was small enough that everybody knew your mother's name and your father's name and the name of the dog that bit your uncle at the Harvest Festival in 2003. She had left at 23 with a degree she was still paying for and a suitcase with a broken wheel that she dragged for 3 years before she admitted it was broken and bought a new one. She was 29 now. She had a job. She had a flat with one window that faced another flat's wall. She had a small pot she used for rice and a slightly larger pot she used for everything else. She was fine. She always said that. Fine, fine. Even when nothing was fine. It was a phrase she had inherited from her grandmother, who used to say it while standing in a burnt field, while watching her son pack his things, while touching the space on the wall where a photograph used to be. Fine, fine. It was not optimism. It was armor. A very thin armor made of 2 syllables that you put on every morning before the world got a chance to remind you of everything it had taken. Adaeze put on her armor and got on the bus. Provincial Hall was the kind of building that made you feel smaller just by existing. It was old stone, the serious kind, and it sat at the top of a hill like it had been there since before the hill decided to be a hill. The walls were thick, the windows were narrow, the door was made of a wood so dark it looked like it had been carved out of a particularly dignified night. She told herself it was just a building. The guard at the entrance took the envelope from her, looked at it, looked at her, looked at it again. He had the face of a man who had been looking at things suspiciously for so long that he had forgotten how to look at things any other way. Delivery, she said. He examined the stamp. Ministry, she added, helpfully. He picked up the telephone on his desk, dialed a number, spoke very quietly into it for 30 seconds, then hung up and gave the envelope back to her. "You'll take it in yourself," he said. "Sign-in book." She signed. He gave her a visitor tag the color of a boiled egg and pointed her toward a hallway that felt longer than it should have been. She walked down it. There were portraits on the walls. Men in various states of formal clothing across different decades. Some of them wore traditional attire, the heavy fabric and elaborate beading of the Obi Council's ceremonial dress. Some wore suits. One wore both at the same time in a way that should not have worked, but somehow did. They all had the same expression, which was the expression of men who had stopped being surprised by anything. She found a wooden bench outside a door that said Chambers in carved letters and sat down on it. She waited. 40 minutes. She counted the ceiling tiles. There were 23 full ones and one that had been cut to fit a corner, which she found mildly offensive for reasons she couldn't fully explain. She thought about whether she'd left the stove on. She was almost certain she had not, but she was also almost certain the way you are almost certain when you have not actually checked, which is not certain at all, but more like a calculated wager against your own memory. She had not left the stove on. Probably. A clerk walked past twice without acknowledging her. A very old man came out of a room further down the hall, moved slowly in her direction, slowed down further when he passed her, and then sped back up once he was past, which she had no explanation for. A phone rang somewhere and was answered immediately, like it had been waiting in pain. She looked at the envelope in her lap. Official correspondence. That was all she knew. Ministry to council, which was routine, which happened all the time, which was why they sent a clerk with a broken surname and a visitor tagged the color of a boiled egg, rather than anyone who might actually understand what was inside. She would deliver it. She would get the signature. She would leave. The door marked Chambers opened. She stood up before she'd finished deciding to stand up. There were two men who came out first, both in traditional attire, both moving with the practiced efficiency of men who were always standing 2 steps to the left of someone important. They held the door. Then he came through. She had seen photographs, on notice boards. On the side of that building, you could not work in the civil administration of this province without learning what Chief Emeka Okafor looked like. The way you could not work near the coast without learning what the sea sounded like. It was ambient information, background knowledge, the kind that seeps in without your deciding to absorb it. The photographs had not been wrong. They had just been small. He was not a large man in the way that the word large usually gets used. He was not tall in a way that made you count the height, but there was something about the way he occupied space that made the space aware of him. The way a stone dropped in still water doesn't need to be big to move the whole surface. He wore a simple agbada, deep indigo, no embroidery, no hat. His face was the face of a man who had learned something very specific a long time ago and had been thinking about it ever since in the way that doesn't make you look troubled, just settled, old settled, the kind you don't get to by being comfortable. She had all of this information in the approximately 2 seconds it took him to see her and stop. "Sir," she held out the envelope. "Ministry of Land and Property. Correspondence for your office." She used her formal voice. The one she'd practiced in the bathroom mirror in the first month of her job, until she stopped sounding like she was asking for permission to exist. He took the envelope. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet, not empty, just settled. She had a clipboard for the signature. She held it ready. He turned the envelope over once, examined the seal. Then he looked at her. Not the look of a man assessing a stranger, but something else. Something with a question inside it that she didn't understand yet. "You can wait," he said. It was not exactly a request. She waited. He opened the letter standing up. She didn't mean to watch him read. There was nothing else to look at, and staring at the floor felt more obvious than just letting her eyes rest somewhere neutral. And he was there, and the letter was there, and she was holding a clipboard, and the whole situation had exactly one moving part, which was whatever was happening in his hands. He read. His expression did not move. Men like him had learned to read the way poker players learn to breathe, steadily, without giving anything to the room. Then something changed. It was small. It was barely anything. A stillness beneath the stillness, like when you are watching a body of water that you think is calm, and you see the shadow of something moving underneath. Just once, just enough to understand that the surface was not the whole story. He finished reading. He stood there for 1 full second with the letter open in his hands. Then he looked up, at her. Not at her the way he had looked at her before. Polite, noticing, the reasonable attention you give to the person delivering you something. This was different. This was the way you look at something you had given up on finding. The way you look at something you thought was gone. The two men who had been standing to his sides were very carefully looking at the ceiling and the wall respectively. Adaize held the clipboard slightly tighter. He said her name. Both of them. Not just Adaize. He said the village name too. The full name. The kind of name that only people who knew your people used, who understood that the second name was not just a surname but a belonging, a location, a whole set of coordinates for who you came from. He said it the way people say it when they already know the answer. Her hand tightened on the clipboard. "How do you know that name?" she said. Not a question. It came out wrong, flat. She corrected herself. "How do you know my name?" she said. "I didn't say it. The name is on the correspondence," he said. He held up the letter slightly. "As a beneficiary." She heard the word beneficiary from somewhere underwater. The hallway was very quiet. One of the men to his sides was now studying his own left shoe. "I'm a delivery clerk," she said. "The letter is from the ministry." "Yes," he said. "I know. I didn't write it." "No," he said. "I did." He said it in under 4 sentences. She gave him that. Later, sitting on the bus home, counting the creases she had put into the stamp receipt, she gave him that. He did not draw it out. He did not make a ceremony of it. He said it the way you say something that has been sitting in your chest for a long time, and you have been waiting for the exact right moment to put down. There was a land parcel. In Umueze, her father's family's land, or what had been her father's family's land, before the boundary dispute in 2007 that she had been 12 years old for, and therefore not entirely conscious of, in the way children are not entirely conscious of the mechanisms by which the adults around them lose things. She remembered it as noise, raised voices, and a lot of paper, and her mother's face doing something it didn't usually do. The land was lost. That was the version she'd grown up with. Lost in the way that things disappear in disputes, which is not like losing your keys but more like watching someone take your keys and stand in front of you holding them, and there is nothing you can do because they have more hands than you do in that particular moment. 7 years ago, someone had filed a counterclaim. The someone had access to the original deed documentation, which had been believed lost or destroyed, and had submitted it through the proper legal and civil channels, and the claim had moved the way claims move in government, slowly, expensively, with a great deal of paper at every stage, and it had finally reached the point where it could be acknowledged and returned. The someone was Chief Emeka Okafor. The deed had her grandmother's name on it, full name, village name, which was how he had known hers. She stood there with the clipboard. The stamp receipt was in her hand. She didn't remember him signing it. He must have signed it at some point. She looked at the receipt. It was a small square of paper, official, with today's date printed at the top, and a signature line at the bottom, and a thin red border around the edge that she had never really noticed before, never had reason to, because she had delivered 40 or 50 of these receipts in the past 3 years, and none of them had ever been about anything except paper going from one place to another. She folded it once. She folded it again. He was watching her. Not the way you watch someone who is about to do something interesting. The way you watch someone you've been worried about for a long time who is standing in front of you intact, and you're still doing the inventory, still checking the accounting of it, still making sure the number comes out right. She looked up. "Why?" she said. It came out smaller than she meant it to. He looked at her for a moment, then he looked at the letter again, just briefly, and then back at her. "Your grandmother registered that land properly," he said. "The documentation existed. Someone just needed to find it." "For 7 years," she said. "Some things take that long," he said. She didn't know what to do with that. It sat in the middle of the hallway between them, like something that had just been put down, and neither of them knew how to pick up. She thought about saying thank you. She thought about saying why you. She thought about saying my father cried for 2 months, and we don't talk about that, and my grandmother used to say the name of that land, the way other people say the name of a person they miss. And she died in 2019 without knowing any of this. She said, "Fine, fine." She turned around. She walked down the long hallway with the portraits of men who had stopped being surprised by anything. She passed the clerk, who had never acknowledged her. She passed the spot where the very old man had inexplicably sped up. She pushed open the heavy dark door and walked out into the daylight, which was doing what daylight does, being there, indifferent, bright, completely unaware that something had happened. She gave back the boiled egg visitor tag at the gate. She walked to the bus stop. The bus was crowded in the way that the 3 o'clock bus was always crowded, which was the specific crowded of people who had finished something and were now moving through the space between that something and whatever came next, and none of them were thinking about land deeds or grandmothers, or the way a stranger could hold your name in his mouth like he had been keeping it safe. She got a seat by the window. Outside, the city did what the city does. Moved, shouted, sold things, argued, cooked on the roadside, repaired engines in the open air, was loudly and completely itself in the way that cities are when they have no reason to be quiet. She unfolded the stamp receipt, folded it again, Her grandmother's name was Adana Umweze Okafor. Wait, she had never thought about that. Her grandmother's surname was a different Okafor, not that Okafor. It was a common name, common the way names get common in a region, when enough families share a root word, when enough trees grow from the same soil, and she had never connected. She stopped that thought. She put the receipt in her bag. She looked out the window. The city had no comment. She thought about the land, the actual land. She had only been there twice, both times as a child, and what she remembered was grass, and a particular quality of quiet that was different from city quiet, which is just absence of noise, and more like a presence of something else, something that had accumulated there over time, the way old things accumulate presence, just by enduring. She thought about her grandmother standing on that land. She thought about her grandmother's face, which she could still see clearly, a face that had learned to hold a lot of things without showing them, which was a face that Adeze had apparently inherited, because 3 people in the past year had told her she was difficult to read, and she had accepted this as a compliment each time even when it was not meant as one. She thought about 7 years of someone filing paperwork she would never know about. She thought about the way he had said her name, both names. She looked at her hands. She had her grandmother's hands. Everyone said so. The same long fingers, and the same way of holding things carefully without looking like she was being careful. She had her grandmother's habit of saying fine, fine when she was not fine. She had her grandmother's refusal to make a scene of the things that deserved a scene. She wondered if her grandmother would have made a scene, standing in that hallway. She thought, probably not. She thought, but she would have said something real. Adayeze pressed her forehead very lightly against the glass of the bus window. Outside, someone was selling fabric from a cart and doing it loudly, naming colors like they were personal accomplishments, and a small child was chasing a dog that was not interested in being chased, and a woman in a yellow dress was standing outside a shop talking on the phone in the animated, completely absorbing way of someone whose call was the most important thing happening in any radius. Normal things, the world going about its business. Her land in Umweze was apparently not lost. She had no framework for this. She had built her understanding of certain things around the fact of their absence. Her understanding of her father's silences, her understanding of her grandmother's particular bravery, her understanding of why her family said fine, fine so much. It was all constructed around a loss that had apparently not been final, that had been in the process of being undone for 7 years while she was here in the city learning how to live without it. She did not know how to hold that. She thought about Blessing dropping the envelope on her desk at 8:47 and walking away. She thought about the rider who had called in sick. She thought about the guard who had made her take the envelope in herself. She thought about sitting on that bench for 40 minutes, thinking about the stove. She thought about all of the ways this morning could have been ordinary. It was not ordinary. She did not know what it was. She got home at 5:30. Her flat was the way she had left it. One window, the wall of the opposite flat, the small pot, the slightly larger pot. A calendar on the wall that was still on March, because she kept forgetting to flip it, and also because flipping it felt like admitting that the year was moving faster than she was. She put down her bag. She stood in the middle of the room. She looked at the calendar. It was July. She flipped it to July. Then she turned it back to look at March for a moment, for reasons she couldn't name, and then she flipped it back to July, because it was July, and there was no good reason to pretend otherwise. She sat down on the edge of her bed. She took the stamp receipt out of her bag. It was folded into a small rectangle now, thick with folds, soft at the edges in the way paper gets when it's been handled a lot in a short time. She opened it up, smoothed it flat on her knee. His signature was at the bottom, not the flourish-heavy signature of someone performing importance, just a signature. Clear and even and unhurried, the signature of someone who signed things because they needed to be signed, not because he liked the theater of it. She thought about calling her father. She picked up her phone. She put it back down. She looked at the receipt. Her father was 61 years old. He lived in the same town he had grown up in, 2 hours from Umweze, and he had not been to Umweze in 11 years, because there are places you stop going to when the going becomes an act of grief, rather than an act of belonging. He grew tomatoes now. He had a dog named after a footballer he liked when he was 30. He called her every second Sunday and talked about tomatoes and the dog and occasionally about whether she was eating enough, which was his way of asking if she was okay without being the kind of man who could ask that directly. She did not know how to call him and say what she needed to say. She did not know what she needed to say. She thought, "Your mother's land is coming back." She thought, "Someone spent 7 years on it." She thought, "I met him today by accident and he said my name before I gave it to him, and I walked out without saying anything real, and now I'm sitting here with a folded receipt and I don't know what to do with any of it." She sat there for a while. Then she got up, opened the fridge, looked at what was in it, closed the fridge, opened it again, took out an egg. She made herself something to eat. She ate standing at the counter because she always ate standing when she was thinking about something else, which was most evenings. And tonight it was this: the land, the name, the letter, the man who had read the letter and looked up at her like she was the answer to a question he had been carrying in his coat pocket for years. She rinsed the plate. She dried it. She put it away. She thought, this is the thing about care that travels without you. Someone does something, quietly, without announcement, without knowing if it will arrive, without knowing if the person it's meant for will ever stand in a hallway and be close enough to receive it, and they just keep doing it, keep filing the papers, keep making the calls, keep following the thread, and the person on the other end of it is living their entire life in the meantime, is eating eggs standing at counters, is saying fine, fine, is growing a whole ordinary existence around the shape of what's missing. And then one morning a writer calls in sick, and an envelope gets dropped on the wrong desk, and the whole distance between the doing and the receiving collapses into a single hallway. She looked out the window, the wall of the opposite flat, a light on in one of its windows, someone moving behind it, shadow only, shape of a person making something or washing something or being ordinary in whatever way they were ordinary. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about the exact quality of her grandmother's voice when she said fine, fine, and how it sounded nothing like defeat and nothing like optimism and everything like someone who had decided that the world did not get to see the full accounting of her interior. She thought she would have wanted to know this. She thought she already knew some version of this, that it was possible, that the documentation existed, that someone might look. She thought maybe that was why she kept saying fine, fine, not because she was pretending, because she had decided to believe in the version where it wasn't over yet. Adaeze stood at the window for a long time. The light in the opposite flat went off. The city made its night noises. Engines, voices, something distant that sounded like music but could have been anything. She went to her bag. She took out the receipt again. She unfolded it all the way, smoothed it flat on the table, and looked at it for 1 full minute. Then she took out her phone. She dialed her father's number. It rang twice. He picked up. "Ada," he said, surprised. It was a Thursday. She never called on Thursdays. "Baba," she said. She looked at the receipt. She thought about 7 years. She thought about paperwork moving through channels. She thought about a man in an indigo agbada reading a letter and going still. She thought about the way he had said her name, both names, village name and all. "I need to tell you something," she said. She did not tell him everything that night. She told him the main thing. She told him as plainly as she could, the way you tell someone something when you are not sure how they will receive it, and you want to make sure the shape of it is clear before the emotion catches up. She said there had been a counterclaim filed. She said the original documentation had been found. She said the land might be coming back. He was quiet for a long time. She listened to him being quiet. Then he said something she didn't expect. He didn't say how or who or are you sure. He said her grandmother's name, just her grandmother's name, quietly, in the voice of someone saying the name of something they have been missing in a specific way for a long time. She always said it wasn't over, he said. "I know," Adadige said, even though she hadn't known, not in those words, not until just now. "She made me write the name down," he said, told me to keep it, said the name on the original deed was the important thing. The name is what they can't erase. His voice did something at the end of that sentence that he covered quickly with a sound that was not quite a cough. I thought she was just being stubborn. She was being stubborn, Adawase said. He laughed, short and real. She hadn't heard him laugh on a Thursday in years. She called in late to work the next morning. Blessing, who owed her 17 favors she had never called in, said fine. Adawase sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and the receipt and her phone and the name of the Obi Council's administrative office, which she had looked up the night before and written down on the back of an old receipt for cooking oil. She thought about what she needed to do next. There would be more paperwork. There was always more paperwork. Paperwork had its own ecosystem, its own reproductive cycle, the way that every document spawned 3 more documents, and every signature required 2 preceding signatures, and every form asked for the form you had filled out before it. She knew this world. She had spent 6 years in it. She also knew, in the way you know things when you've been paying attention, that the process moved differently when someone with the weight of a paramount chief's office had already started it moving. She thought about what she would say if she went back there. She thought about standing in that hallway again, this time with her own purpose rather than someone else's envelope, this time knowing what she was walking toward. She thought about whether that was something she would do. She drank her tea. It was a small kitchen. She had a table that was technically a folding table she had never folded, a chair she had found outside a flat 2 floors up when someone was moving out, and a window with a view of the wall. She had lived in this kitchen for 3 years, and she had never once thought of it as temporary, never once thought of it as a waiting room for somewhere better. It was where she was. That was enough. But she thought about the land. She thought about grass, and quiet of a different kind. She thought about her grandmother's hands moving over a deed with both names on it. She thought about someone finding that deed, and deciding, quietly and without expectation of credit, to do the whole long, expensive thing of bringing it back. She thought, I didn't even say thank you. She looked at the receipt. She folded it once more, carefully this time, along the original crease, and put it in the front pocket of her bag, where she kept the things she needed not to lose. She finished her tea. She washed the cup. She put on her shoes. She was going to be late to work. She was going to be late to work because she was going to make one stop first, at the provincial hall, with no envelope and no clipboard and no supervisor's errand to hide behind, and she was going to walk down that hallway with the portraits and knock on the door marked Chambers, and she was going to say what she should have said yesterday, which was not thank you, though she would say that too, but the thing before the thank you, the more honest thing. I didn't know someone was looking. She locked her flat door. She stood in the hallway for a moment. She said it quietly, to nobody, to the wall, to the particular silence of early morning in a building where everyone else was still deciding whether to get up. Fine, fine. And for the first time in longer than she could honestly say, she meant it.